Hi everyone, here's a very rough sit down video for an introduction to debating on how to debate and this and that, and essentially what debating is even about. So debating in simple terms for many people is just chagra. We like to call it a very structured argumentation, fancy word for chagra. And essentially there's a topic and you have to discuss it quite critically. Even if you do not know anything about it, trust me, you will still find ways to debate for a topic and you might even win a round. And you might hear a lot of formats, for example, WSDC, BP, AP, and you're like, what are these terms? Well, essentially, these are different formats which a debate might follow. For this tournament, as well as a lot of future tournaments in this country and abroad, we follow WSDC format, which is the World School Debate Championship format, and it's used in high schools essentially. And let's just go through an entire overview of who are in the teams and who do they represent. So essentially, each WSDC teams have three speakers. You have your first speaker who define the debate and introduce some key arguments and maybe even go through some arguments. You have a second speaker who refutes the opposition as well as build on the team's case and perhaps introduce a second argument. And then you have your third speaker who focuses on rebuttaling and basically refuting the points that opposition might have brought up, as well as summarizing the debate and showing why you have won the debate. And the opposition, they basically explain what the opposition is basically against whatever the proposition is for. So the proposition have to argue for the motion, and opposition has to argue against it. But before all that, what does a motion even mean? A motion is just a fancy term for a statement over which teams are going to debate about. For example, this house regrets the rise of cancel culture. You'll see a lot of terms such as THR or THBT or THW. These are shorthands for the first couple words of a debate motion. This house regrets, this house believes that, and this house would, and this house should. So essentially, those are literally what they mean. When you have this house regrets, you're going against a motion. For example, this house regrets the rise of cancel culture. We do not support the rise of cancel culture. Therefore, this house regrets the rise of cancel culture. Or if we have a motion, this house supports the banning of alcohol. It means that you are for supporting alcohol as side proposition, and as side opposition you will say why banning alcohol is not a good idea. Similarly, this house would means that as an actor, as someone that says a policymaker, you will do something. For example, this house would ban zoos. And the last one would be this house believes. So essentially, it's also again you're debating for something. So this house believes that an actor should act a certain way. That's essentially how the motion goes. So there are basically two types of motion. One is a policy motion, where you debate about how things should be done, whether it should be done a certain way, what are the repercussions of it, and then value motions, which are basically based on moral judgment. So these tend to be the more philosophical debates or debates about ethnicities and whatnot. So essentially when you get a motion, the first thing you should do is just read it and understand what the motion is essentially asking for. So you have to underline the key components of it, such as, let's say, a stakeholder is being mentioned, for example, ethnic groups, and anything that's being done to them, for example, housing systems for an ethnic group. So you have to underline all of these key components and break them down and make sure you understand not only what they mean individually, but also string together. Again, as mentioned in my how to prep video, if you have any confusion for a motion, make sure you get your motion clarification or just ask about what this motion is about while in the auditorium or while you're getting the motion right there and then. So how exactly do people speak in a WSDC debate format? Firstly, each team again has three speakers. However, each team gives 4 speeches. Here is how. So you have your first speaker, and then the first speaker again provides the definition and sets the framework for the debate. And the second speaker again builds on the case. Third speaker focuses on rebuttal, and then the fourth speech that's going to be given, that's given by your first or your second speaker, and basically gives an overview on the entire debate and which team has won. So that's called the reply speech. So here's how the format goes, right? So for government, you first have your first speaker, and then opposition comes in, and their first speaker, who is called the leader of opposition. For government, it's called prime minister, and for opposition, it's called leader of opposition. So the leader of opposition comes up and refutes what the government has said, as well as set the framework for their case. And then the second speaker of government, called the deputy prime minister, they come up and they refute what opposition said and continue to build on to their government case. And then the second speaker of op does the same thing. It refutes whatever government said and build on their case. Third speaker, the whip of government, they work on their own case, and they work on the clashes, they summarize the debate. And then third speaker from op also does the same, refutes the third speaker of gov, as well as the rest of the entire government bench. And then you have a reply speech. So usually there was a zigzag pattern, that gov op, gov op, gov op. For the fourth speaker, we last ended in whip. We're gonna continue with op, right? We're gonna still continue with op, and we're gonna have their fourth speaker from op. The first reply speech will be from op. So right after op's whip, you're gonna have the reply speech from op, and they're gonna summarize the debate, why we won. It's a 4-minute speech, by the way. The rest of the 3 speeches that we had, there were 8 minutes. This one is a 4-minute speech. And then the government reply is gonna come up, and they're gonna give the speech, the 4-minute speech, and that's the last speaker of the debate, of the round. And yeah, also remember that only first and second speaker of this entire of each team can be the reply speaker. The third speaker or the whip cannot be the reply speaker. A lot of people ask, oh my god, 8 minutes, I have to talk for 8 minutes, that's a lot. Not necessarily. I know at first it might seem very daunting that I have to go up there and speak for 8 minutes, but a lot of the times people run out of time. So obviously, it's not like you have to be super experienced for you to run out of time. Like even in this tournament, in the intra, you might end up running out of time. So yeah, and even if you have to end the speech early, it's fine. Don't panic, just end the speech early. A lot of people ask if it's a back and forth conversational style as well. And no, it really isn't. So essentially what happens is in WSDC, you keep speaking. However, your opposition can ask for POI, or point of information. So essentially they ask for a POI, which is they question what you're saying. So after the first minute, and after the first minute, you're allowed to ask the POI, and you have to, and there's a period from the first minute to the 7th minute. So essentially from the first minute of the debate to the 7th minute of the debate, the opposition can ask a POI at any time. However, after the 7th minute, aka at the last minute of the debate, you cannot ask any POI. So that's the only time when you might have some sort of a quote-unquote conversation where the opposition might be like POI, and then you can pick them up, you can choose to reply to that POI, and they will ask something regarding your case. And usually this is done, like especially like good debaters, they use it for their advantage. When they usually find a loophole or a weakness in the opposition's case, they ask for a POI to kind of exploit that and show it to the judge. Hey, look, they have this weakness and they're not able to cover it up. However, if you're able to answer your POI well, that's a point for you. A lot of judges or a lot of judge, they tend to encourage people to give POIs or answer POIs because they increase your individual scores as well. So essentially, a lot of debating is about rebuttaling, and rebuttaling is pretty tough, but essentially what it means is that you're responding to the other team's arguments. So the effective way to rebuttal is mainly you have to listen carefully and identify key flaws or loopholes in the other team's logic or evidence or any examples that they use, and you have to address them well. So yeah, and here is how you basically, and obviously we have given a video on how to prep, so it's good that you follow that as well, and that kind of lays out a lot of the groundwork for how to debate. And to make things more clear, I will be breaking down a simple motion for you guys from side, prop, and op as well. And that is my first example of the motion that I gave, which is this house regrets the rise of cancel culture. So, firstly, the main things that you need to do is A, provide a burden, B, provide your models, C, comparatives, and yeah, that's essentially a few of the most important things that I need to do in a debate. So I use a lot of jargon like burdens and models and comparatives and what do these even mean? So essentially, a burden is simply what you have to prove in a debate, an objective that you have to prove in a debate. I've explained that in my prep motion video as well. So it's like you have to, if you are able to prove this, if you're able to prove that your side of the house is able to reach specific outcomes, then your side wins. For example, this house regrets a rise. This house regrets the rise of cancel culture. So over here, your burden would be to prove that cancel culture provides more harms than goods, in more harm than good in a society, and that its negative effects outweigh any potential positive effects of accountability that might come with cancel culture, and therefore there are better alternatives to hold people accountable without the detrimental effects of that cancel culture brings about. These can be the burdens set by side proposition, and your constructives or your main arguments need to be based around these burdens of what you're trying to prove. And then you have your models, which is essentially how exactly you're going to bring about the change that you want to bring. I'll continue to illustrate this further. So let's move up. I already told you what a burden means. Now I'm going to move on with the constructive. So essentially, constructive are these key arguments for each and every motion. So let's say for this house regrets the rise of cancel culture. The first thing I want to think is, okay, why is cancel culture bad? A lot of people say that it does not, it kind of compresses freedom of speech. That can be an argument. Essentially, the argument is that cancel culture is detrimental to freedom of speech. Another argument can be that the fact that it's disproportionate and usually leads to unfair consequences. So celebrities might face disproportionately high consequences or disproportionately low consequences if they're more favored by the audience, depending on who's favored how much by the audience. And and another argument can be it erodes social cohesion because it pits people against each other so much that social harmony gets disrupted, and that has a net negative impact. In entirety of society, especially when it comes to political or cultural views, and it tends to exacerbate these divides, which we're so trying to make sure that it's not as exacerbated. So these can be your arguments. That's how you basically frame arguments. But before you move on to arguments, it's also important, especially as a first speaker for side proposition, to define what cancel culture really is. So for example, as first speaker, you come into the stage and you're like, okay, cancel culture refers to the social phenomena where individuals or groups of people are publicly shamed, boycotted, or deplatformed due to any present or past behavior that has been evident in their life, and it's deemed to be unacceptable by societal norms. And then you move on to the argument. So one of the arguments that I gave is that it's detrimental to free speech. So when you're talking about these arguments, you're like, okay, the main header is the fact that cancel culture suppresses diverse opinions and it discourages open dialogue. So what is the explanation to that? I give a one-liner. This is a one-liner. What is my explanation for this? Essentially, what happens is, due to cancel culture, people are afraid to express any controversial or unpopular views, and it's quite healthy to be able to express these views because that's what a democracy is. That's what free speech is. But if you're not able to do that, that leads to an unhealthy balance where anyone who has favorable views are only allowed to express themselves, and anyone who doesn't are not allowed to express themselves. And you can give example to illustrate this point. For example, a lot of scholars or academics, they're usually silenced or shunned because of their differing views from what is viewed as the acceptable norm. And finally, a link, what I like to call a link, is that what does all of this lead to? Okay, all of this happened. What does it lead to? leads to a fear of cancellation. It leads to a self-censorship where you don't even have to have people censor you. You end up censoring yourself because you're so scared of speaking up. So you basically repeat this with all of your arguments. So the three arguments that I told you: detriment to free speech, disproportionate and unfair consequence, and it erodes social cohesion. You kind of repeat this 4-step process for each and every argument. Step 1, a one-liner, essentially explaining what that argument is in just one line. And number 2, explaining the effect of the argument, essentially what, let's say, a certain prospect of cancel culture can lead to. Number 3, giving an example, for example, like I said, about scholars being silenced. And number 4, what is the overall impact of it, aka the link. So you can essentially analyze your entire argument in these four layers, and that's pretty sufficient for especially a beginner, and it helps a lot. So we have covered our burden, we've covered our argument. Now we're gonna move on to a model. So model is essentially what step can you follow, or what steps or can you take in order to achieve the change that you want to achieve. So for example, and this the motion that we're discussing right now is not really a model motion. It's simply more of a morality motion. However, you can involve somewhat of a alternative to cancel culture here, for example, such as a more restorative model of accountability where individuals who make mistakes are given the opportunity or chance for change. Because in cancel culture, what happens usually, you just shun the people out of society once you realize they have done something wrong in their past. Instead, in an alternative world, how about you let people give people the opportunity to learn and grow and educate themselves and rehabilitate themselves. And essentially it's basically where you hold people accountable through proper procedures, such as workplace procedures or legal systems, instead of like simply deplatforming them or just absolutely getting rid of them, so on and so forth. So yeah, that is how you can create an entire comprehensive speech where you have an argument, a burden, arguments, and then model. And I'm going to also quickly talk about what an opposition case might look like. So again, an opposition is going to define cancel culture in a different way. So you can see that in prop, I was like, cancel culture is a collective effort. Is collectively shunning a person for doing something wrong that they might have done in their past. So it kind of puts cancel culture in a negative light. However, as side opposition, you can say that it's a collective action where individuals or groups are held accountable for harmful actions or statements that through social and economic consequences, and these harmful actions or statements are facing such consequences because they have had harmful impacts on society. So you see, as side opposition, when I come up here and I'm talking about cancel culture, my entire definition of cancel culture, especially from the right off the bat, is going to be a bit more protective. It's going to be a bit more positive. I'm showing cancel culture more as an accountability system rather than a system which is mercilessly shunning people or deplatforming them or just causing them to lose jobs. So you have to be really clever about how you frame topics. So if you're protecting something, you have to make sure you frame it as such. When you're shunning something, when you're regretting something, you also have to make sure you frame it as such. And for side opposition, the arguments can be that cancel culture is actually good because it's a very effective way of holding people accountable for harmful actions. And you can talk about, okay, yes, some people, it might be a little extreme at times, but the negative connotations of cancel culture gets outweighed by the positive connotations, because at the end of the day, this makes people more aware that you should not be doing or saying such things, etc., etc. And you can also talk about how it helps to empower marginalized communities, because cancel culture is usually happens when there's something that goes on which is offensive to a certain marginalized community, and through cancel culture, you're actually, by bringing down these perpetrators of, let's say, racism or prejudice, you're able to bring up the or empower the people of marginalized communities. And it also, it, even though it has a little bit of negative connotation, the uh, the the potential of it bringing, or of it being able to promote change, is also much greater. And side government is like, oh, you're my previous argument one of my previous arguments is like, oh, you're absolutely, like, the way you're deplatforming or shunning these people, it's leaving really little room for them to be allowed to bring change or something. Well, as opposition, you can come up and say, well, people are not always truly cancelled, because even those who are cancelled are able to bounce back. And that's true. You can give examples for that. For example, people like Kevin Hart, they were cancelled they were cancelled previously, but now they're back again because they're able to show that they have improved or worked on themselves. So essentially, you, as side opposition, you can say that, look, side proposition, whatever side proposition is saying, well, cancel culture is not as bad as it seems, but rather it has already proven to be a very effective tool for moral reflection. So with all of these constructives, your essential burden as side opposition would be to show that cancel culture serves as an essential tool for holding people and institutions accountable, and that social benefits and moral benefits from cancel culture through promoting justice and empowering marginalized voices, it ends up outweighing the harms that comes with it, and that it is a very effective and necessary mechanism to promote ethical behavior and change. So essentially, as side opposition, your model would be to show that rather than canceling, rather than finding an alternative for cancel culture, it is important to allow, it is important that we carry out cancel culture in a more meaningful way, and hopefully have it enact meaningful societal changes when traditional systems fail to do so. So essentially, this was a very beginner level debate breakdown for all of you guys to kind of give an example of how this goes, where this goes. I would highly recommend checking all of the other videos that the rest of the EB is going to produce in a short while. And yeah, if you have any questions, you're like, feel free to DM any of us, any of the EB. And yeah, we'll hope to see you in the next videos. Bye.